Imagine working harder every single year while wealth seems moving away even faster than before today. Your salary rises slowly each year, yet houses, stocks, and assets sprint ahead relentlessly everywhere. It feels unfair because in many ways the numbers increasingly suggest exactly that reality today. Millions believe income creates wealth, but modern economies increasingly reward ownership over labor instead. That distinction sounds small at first until you see what happened over several decades. The gap between workers and asset owners didn't suddenly appear overnight or accidentally emerge. It emerged quietly, year after year, hidden beneath ordinary economic headlines across many countries. Most people noticed symptoms first before understanding the mechanism quietly creating them underneath today. Homes became expensive, stocks surged higher, retirement looked increasingly distant and uncertain suddenly. Yet wages often felt stuck despite productivity gains and extraordinary technological progress over decades. Something important fundamentally changed in how wealth gets created and distributed throughout economies today. To understand it properly, we need to follow the money very carefully from beginning. Start with two neighbors living on the same street under similar economic conditions together. One owns appreciating assets while the other depends entirely on salary income for survival. Both work hard, save responsibly, and avoid reckless financial decisions throughout their adult lives. 10 years later, their financial outcomes look surprisingly different despite similar efforts indeed. The worker earned income repeatedly through labor but spent most of it eventually. The owner earned income while assets generated additional wealth independently in the background continuously. That's where the story begins becoming economically fascinating, revealing uncomfortable truths beneath appearances today. Assets possess a unique ability that salaries simply do not share within economies today. They can appreciate while you sleep, travel, relax, or watch television at home comfortably. Salaries usually stop growing the moment work stops temporarily or permanently altogether for individuals. Ownership operates under entirely different rules than labor within modern economies around the world. Those rules became increasingly powerful during recent decades worldwide, shaping financial outcomes dramatically everywhere. Historically, wages and asset values often moved somewhat together during periods of economic expansion. Workers benefited directly when economies expanded, businesses grew, and productivity improved steadily overall. Then, globalization accelerated competition across labor markets around the world at unprecedented speed. Companies gained access to much larger pools of workers internationally than ever before. That increased efficiency significantly but also reduced wage bargaining power for many workers globally. Businesses could produce substantially more without raising salaries proportionally anymore in many industries. Productivity continued climbing steadily while wage growth became increasingly restrained and disconnected instead. Many workers never noticed this shift happening quietly beneath surface statistics and headlines today. Meanwhile, another powerful force was transforming the financial landscape completely elsewhere behind scenes. Central banks began lowering interest rates across developed economies consistently over many years. Initially, this seemed beneficial for households, businesses, and economic growth alike across markets. Borrowing became cheaper, spending increased, economic growth received additional support for extended periods. But lower interest rates create effects extending far beyond loans and mortgages alone within modern markets. They influence how investors value nearly every financial asset available throughout modern markets. Imagine receiving $100 annually from an investment forever without interruption, continuously. When interest rates fall, that future income stream suddenly becomes much more valuable. Investors suddenly pay significantly higher prices for exactly the same asset than before. Nothing changed about the asset itself during this process fundamentally or physically whatsoever. Only the financial environment surrounding it changed dramatically, altering perceptions of value instead. Yet prices often rise substantially because of that adjustment alone across financial markets. Stocks benefited greatly, real estate benefited too, bonds benefited, collectibles benefited as well. Asset owners watched valuations climb rapidly while wages moved only modestly upward over time. The difference wasn't always obvious during individual years when viewed in isolation, though. Over decades, however, the cumulative effect became enormous and impossible to ignore financially. This is where compound growth quietly changes everything beneath the surface without announcement. Most people understand compound interest theoretically, but underestimate its practical impact over decades. A salary increase helps only after another full year of work and effort. An appreciating asset increases wealth without requiring additional labor, time, or effort afterward. Then, future gains build upon previous gains automatically, creating accelerating growth over time. The snowball grows larger because the hill never stops descending beneath it naturally. Asset growth compounds continuously. Labor income generally does not compound in similar ways. That's an important distinction often hidden within everyday economic conversations and financial discussions. Consider someone owning a diversified portfolio during a particularly strong market decade recently. Their gains generate additional gains without requiring extra working hours or responsibilities afterward. Meanwhile, workers negotiate raises 1 percentage point at a time repeatedly through careers. One process compounds naturally and automatically. The other depends on negotiation and circumstances. That difference becomes increasingly visible across longer periods, especially during strong market cycles. Then, technology entered the picture and amplified these existing trends even further globally. Digital platforms created enormous economic value with relatively few employees involved compared historically. Successful companies could scale globally without proportional workforce expansion anymore across multiple markets. Revenue exploded much faster than payrolls in many industries afterward, changing incentives significantly. Investors captured much of that growth through ownership stakes rather than direct labor alone. Employees benefited too, but often less dramatically than shareholders and founders ultimately did. Again, ownership proved increasingly powerful compared with labor income alone across modern economies. Then came the financial crisis that reshaped economic policy permanently across major economies worldwide. Governments and central banks intervened aggressively to stabilize markets and restore confidence worldwide. Interest rates moved even lower and remained there for years afterward across economies. Financial systems flooded with liquidity, seeking productive destinations throughout global markets continuously thereafter. Much of that newly created money entered financial assets rather than wages directly. Stocks recovered rapidly. Property markets strengthened significantly. Asset prices surged across economies. Workers experienced slower recoveries despite broader economic stabilization efforts and policy interventions afterward. This created an unusual environment that few people fully recognized or understood initially. Asset inflation often exceeded wage inflation by significant margins repeatedly across many countries. The wealthy owned assets. The middle class owned fewer assets than before historically. Those without assets depended almost entirely on earned income for financial progress instead. Different starting positions produced increasingly different financial outcomes over time and across generations. Ironically, many people celebrated rising asset prices without hesitation or concern initially whatsoever. Rising markets felt like undeniable evidence of economic success, strength, and prosperity everywhere. Yet higher asset prices create barriers for future buyers trying to enter markets. Every winner in appreciation potentially creates challenges and disadvantages for newcomers entering later. Housing illustrates this dynamic particularly well in modern economies around the world today. Existing owners gained wealth as home values increased dramatically across neighborhoods and cities nationwide. First-time buyers faced larger down payments, higher prices, and greater monthly obligations instead. The same trend produced completely opposite experiences for different groups simultaneously across society. That's why economic averages often hide important realities and struggles underneath the surface. Another factor quietly widened the gap between income growth and asset growth further. Tax systems frequently treat investment gains differently than wages earned through labor today. In many places, capital receives advantages that labor rarely enjoys under current rules. Investment gains may face lower rates than earned income taxation in many jurisdictions. Small differences compound into remarkably large outcomes when stretched across decades eventually afterward. The system doesn't always reward effort equally when compared with ownership and assets. It often rewards scarce assets operating within favorable financial conditions and environments instead. That reality challenges many assumptions people hold about wealth creation and success today. People are taught to focus primarily on earning more income throughout their careers. Income certainly matters, but ownership increasingly influences long-term outcomes much more today. Modern wealth often grows through assets significantly faster than salaries alone can achieve. That's not necessarily because workers became less valuable overall within economies today whatsoever. Rather, financial systems became increasingly optimized around asset values and capital growth mechanisms. Markets respond quickly to capital flows, monetary policy, and financial conditions overall. Wages respond more slowly because humans negotiate them directly through employment relationships. Houses cannot demand raises, yet often outperform salary growth across extended periods, surprisingly. Stocks never attend meetings, yet frequently compound wealth much faster than salaries alone. There's something strangely ironic and revealing about that economic reality indeed for society. The hardest working person isn't always the fastest growing financially in modern economies anymore. Sometimes ownership matters far more than additional hours worked or effort invested today. That doesn't mean work lacks value, importance, or economic necessity whatsoever for society. Economies still depend heavily on labor, innovation, productivity, and human activity fundamentally. But rewards increasingly flow through ownership channels before reaching labor participants afterward. Understanding that mechanism completely changes how economic trends appear and make sense afterward. Suddenly, many confusing headlines begin making much more sense when viewed together holistically. Rising markets alongside stagnant wages no longer seem contradictory or economically impossible anymore. They become predictable outcomes of underlying financial structures operating beneath visible economic activity. Yet this trend raises larger questions about future stability, opportunity, and fairness ahead. What happens when assets continually outpace income growth for generations without interruption, permanently? Can younger workers realistically catch up through labor income alone under these conditions? Will ownership become increasingly concentrated among fewer households and families eventually over time? History suggests widening wealth gaps often create social, economic, and political pressures eventually. Economic systems function best when opportunity remains broadly accessible across society for everyone. If ownership increasingly determines outcomes, access becomes critically important for future generations eventually. Otherwise, wealth may increasingly reflect starting positions rather than contributions, effort, or innovation. That's a difficult conversation many societies continue avoiding despite growing evidence today worldwide. Because questioning the system often feels uncomfortable for those currently benefiting from it. Yet, ignoring the trend won't make it disappear or reverse direction either eventually. Assets continue growing steadily, salaries continue chasing from behind year after year persistently. The numbers reveal a story much larger than individual choices alone can explain. The unanswered question remains whether future wealth comes primarily from work or ownership.